The idea that this is.
Okay, can everybody hear me? How's the volume? Done. Okay. So we're gonna ask everybody if you could take a seat, please, we'd like to start. So, guys, if you could take a seat, can I ask you to take a seat? And we're gonna start. So, great. How's that? All right. Okay, well, by the way, despite the planning that went into this, we didn't think of one thing. And then that window up there does not have a shade. So, as the slides go through, you'll see the setting sun gradually move to the right there. But, it makes me think maybe we should start the next meeting at 7 o'clock rather than 6:30, but, we'll see. We'll try to get a shade. But at any rate, the other thing to announce to you tonight is that, the facility here felt in our first workshop that we were a little bit late. They like to close up everything by 9 o'clock, so they asked if we could finish this around 8:30. So that, and I think we can. We're gonna try to do our slide presentation in about 50 minutes or so, and then we're gonna open it up for Q&A after, and we have coffee here for the public. So at any rate, we'll start. So I'm gonna introduce myself. I'm Frank Fish. I'm principal of BFJ Planning for the firm that's been retained by the state to do this study. And I'm just going to introduce it. The other speakers will introduce themselves as they get up to talk. And I think actually I'll just go to the next slides. And I realize that you won't be able to see all these slides. I'll highlight it. The whole slide presentation will be put up online, so it'll all be available on the website. And at the end of this, we'll leave the website address up for you, so everybody will have it. But anyway, the agenda tonight, we're hoping to just give you a brief overview where we are in the schedule. I'll cover that, and then I'm going to turn this to Jameson for economic conditions, and then we'll turn it to Jim Olson for environmental conditions, and we'll turn it to Ron, who's our expert on the airport operations. And then we're going to go to next steps. Thomas Madden from our office, who's our project manager for this, will conclude the presentation. So that's what we hope to do. And again, I'm Frank Fish, and you can see the other people. Thomas is project manager. There's Suzanne Goldberg, Terry Young from our office. Jim Olson will speak on environmental issues. Ron Price on airport operations, and then Jameson on economic impacts. So that's the speakers tonight. If you were here at the first workshop, you saw this slide. The first two slides are the only slides I think are a little bit from the first workshop. But we did want to, in our client group, Department of Economic and Community Development, ECD, wanted us to make sure we covered the legislative mandate, and we just highlighted in yellow. We're asked to assess the benefits, opportunity costs to the city and state with the current use of the Brainard, and also look at, are there alternative uses to the airport property? And we said in the first meeting, we're going to try to take the hardest look, just a hard look at this. Want to look at both options. And we are not recommending any option. We've got to get through this process. And we'll go through the process on this. But tonight, we just want to report back to some of the economic data that we're starting to develop. And then some on the economic impacts of, the airport itself. And then identification of some of the environmental issues that we are now starting to develop. So we're into the first three elements of this legislative mandate. So far, we're going to report back to you tonight on that. And then the dark blue up on top is sort of the overall process of the study, the airport operations, environmental due diligence, the whole thing going through June. Also, we're going to start looking at highest and best uses. We're just starting into that. And at the end, over the summer, that's where we're going to look at recommendations. The current use stay, and or alternative development scenarios. We're going to look at both. And then we'll have a final report. We've been told, and this is the legislative mandate to us, is we must get a report in at the end of September, beginning of October. So that's the overall schedule that we're working on. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Jameson to talk a little bit about the economic conditions.
Thanks, Frank. My name is Jameson Day. I'm a project manager with HRA Advisors. We are an economic development and public policy real estate advisory consulting firm based in New York. It is a pleasure to be here with you tonight, talking a little bit about some preliminary findings and some of what we are supposed to do here as part of this analysis as a sub-consultant to EHR. So first, in terms of HRNA's role on this analysis, we'll be studying the economic impacts and the fiscal impacts of the airports. Again, as Frank said, both in terms of its current operations, but also in terms of the legislatively mandated look at an alternative scenarios. So in terms of economic impacts, we're going to be looking at both direct activity, so that's employment and operations directly on the site, as well as indirect activity and induced activity, which would be folks either in industries serving the site or spending by employees in direct and indirect activities in the broader economy as well. We measure those economic impacts in three ways. We'll look at employment, we'll look at labor income, so wages and salaries, and we'll look at total economic health. You can think of that like your gross regional product generated. We'll also take a close look at the fiscal impact. So we're going to talk a little bit about the payment in lieu of taxes, which I understand was part of the questions about that came up in the previous meeting. We'll also look at tax revenues generated by activity on the site, as well as other fees. I'm just going to quickly go through this, but our work thus far, we've done a review of prior studies. There is an airport activity survey and registered aircraft owner survey that is in the field right now. A sub-consultant in HRNA audience research analysis, ARA, has sent out surveys to aircraft owners and employers on the site, asking for some data about activity there. The purpose of this, there's going to be some quantitative data collected to help underline the economic impact study. We also hope to get sort of a richer context of the activity that's being run at the airport. And I would just sort of say that no individual responses are going to be sort of shared as part of it. So any sort of quantitative data is going to be anonymized and aggregated. Any sort of qualitative data that's a little bit more open-ended, while the sense might be part of the broader articulation of what's going on in terms of economic impacts, we're not going to be taking from anything. And I know I talked to someone tonight who has received a survey, but if you receive a survey, this is an example of one of the pages. As I understand, the full survey will be as an appendix to the report, and I believe on the web page at a certain point. And then lastly, coming back to the slide here, we are advancing an assessment of the real estate market and the economic conditions in Hartford. So we've done a site visit to the airport and surrounding neighborhood. We're doing a scan of the regional demographic and employment data, and then doing stakeholder outreach to validate data, but also inform market data on certain uses and activity within the broader region. So I want to take just a step back as we talk about some of the fiscal impacts of the airport. I understand that during one of the previous public meetings, there was a question about the payment of taxes, and so we want to spend a little bit of time talking about that today. But before we dig into some of the numbers there, I want to just kind of get a shared understanding around the ownership of the airport and its tax exempt status, which I'm sure many of you already but it is a state-owned property. It is tax exempt, meaning it does not pay property taxes to the city of Hartford. Instead, the state makes a consolidated payment in lieu of taxes pilot for all of its state-owned property to the various municipalities around the state. In the airport's assessed value is included in the state's calculation of what it is expected to pay from a statutory standpoint. Again, the airport does not write a check for its pilot, the state writes it on its behalf. So the pilot attributed to the state-owned property, which the airport fits under that category in this case, is equal to, and I know it's right in the sign, but it says 45% of the property tax. So 45% is the key number there for that piece. For years, the state has underfunded its pilot commitment, its statutory requirement in terms of its pilot commitment. Beginning in fiscal year 2022, the state established a new way to allocate its limited pilot funding to municipalities around the state. So it was directing aid through the pilot program to communities with higher needs. In Hartford, met sort of the highest need for this, so it was considered a tier 1 city. As a tier 1 city, it receives 50% of the statutory set of the 45% of the pilot. So it's an effective rate of 32.5% based on the pilot. So what does this look like? Again, this is sort of estimated and conceptual. There's no line in the state budget that says Hartford Brainard Airport pilot. But if you look at the, and I'm comparing on the left side, we have all state-owned property within the city of Hartford. There's a little over 1.1 billion in assessed value. And you look at the real property tax rate, as well as the state mandated pilot rate and the tier 1 pilot share, it's a total payment of estimated approximately 21 million. If you look just at Hartford Brainard Airport share that can be attributed to the airport, the assessed value is 40 million, a little over 3.5% total. Same property tax rate. The state mandated pilot rate, again, that's 45%. That was that key number from before. And the tier 1 pilot share of 50%. If you multiply that down, you end up with an estimated pilot attributed to the airport of approximately $660,000. Now, I'll say that this is a newer way of calculating the pilot. So I believe there was a 2015 study that the state had done a similar calculation of pilot that was before the tiered system was in. That value was a bit lower. So I want to kind of folks to sort of keep that in mind as we're looking at the values. Of course, the pilot's not the only fiscal benefit that the city receives from activity. So there are some sort of direct local benefits. So other fees and revenues that are generated on site, things such as the aircraft registration fee, which goes to the city of Hartford. There are other business license and taxes that can go to the city of Hartford directly. And we talked about the pilot there. And there's also state tax benefits, of which a portion is pushed back to the city of Hartford through its municipal revenue sharing agreements. So things such as sales taxes on repair, replacement of parts, other sales on the airport's on the premises. There's personal income taxes of employees who also live in Hartford. There are business income taxes, and then motor fuels taxes, other taxes such as the service tax, and fees and charges for services that will be exploring as well. We sort of have an understanding of what these are. The actual values of some of these, a lot of these are going to be informed by the survey responses that we are working on now to have an understanding of how much activity is going on there. And so we hope to share more on the values of these in subsequent programs. So next steps, as far as HRNA's scope of work is concerned, is to continue to follow up on the survey and analyze the responses, quantify those fiscal impacts, like I had said, including the taxes and fees, and affirming the pilot structure going forward, and then getting into the modeling of the economic impacts using inputs developed by the surveyors. And we will continue the market assessment as well. And with that, I will hand it to Jim Olson to talk about our conclusions.
So thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. My name is Jim Olson, licensed environmental professional in Connecticut, my bond. Time bond is a sub-consultant. We have Jade Planning. Is that better?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So again, Jim Olson, thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. I'm a licensed environmental professional from Time Bond. Time Bond is a sub-consultant with Jade Planning. We are brought on board to evaluate the potential environmental impacts to the airport from its long history. So the way we go about doing that is a standard process, the environmental site assessment process. It's in 3 phases. So the first one we do here is a phase 1. And the the purpose of phase 1 is identify the area we call the areas of concern, or AOCs. It's defined in the Connecticut Department of Energy Environmental Protection Site Characterization Guidance document, and also in the ASTM standard. And that involves a number of different steps. Review the past and current subject property activities. And there's a number of records we look at. There's records of the state, of the Department of Energy Environmental Protection. There's online resources. There's historic mapping. So the whole number of resources we look at. We also do a site inspection, and we also do interviews with people knowledgeable of the site. And also we look at the surrounding properties if they have the potential to impact, site environmental media such as soil, groundwater, soil vapor on the property. So we've gone through, we've done the phase 1, we have a draft prepared, and the site was an airport for over a century, opened in 1921. The National Guard is at the site from 1923 until post-World War II. The site is prone to flooding, different flood periods. You have the Clark Dike that abuts the eastern part of the property. The site is currently leased by the state of Connecticut to several tenants that are right on site. As of 2013, the site's administered by the Connecticut DOT and under the purview of the Connecticut Airport Authority. So again, we completed draft of the phase 1, and from that work, we identified 23 areas of concern and 5 recognized environmental conditions under the 2 standards. And what we found is the airport has, typical types of AOCs, RECs that you would expect with an airport facility. Aircraft maintenance and repair activities, historical airport activities, aircraft accidents, underground storage tanks, and above ground storage tanks. I mean, this airport had dozens of tanks over the years since the 20s. They go through generations, they pass their life expectancies, they have to be replaced. Other associated AOCs, transformers, electrical transformers that can have PCBs in them, diesel generators, and oil water separators. There's also offsite AOCs, the Clark Dike, the Connecticut River, the Mira, the Northern Trash Energy Facility to the north, and the MDC wastewater treatment plant. So those are the findings are of the phase 1. The phase 1 did define there's a potential that there could have been what we call releases to the environment that impacted soil, groundwater, soil vapor. The answer is yes. So the next part of the process is to do a phase 2, and we're planning for that right now. We have a work plan we're pulling together, and that's going to provide initial evaluation of soil and groundwater to see if there's actual releases. So we actually go out, we collect soil samples, groundwater samples, we analyze them, we see if there's been a release. And if that's the case, which I'm sure we're gonna find some impacts out there based on this sort of site. So then the next part would need to do a phase 3. Because if you have a release, the first question is somebody's gonna ask you, well, how big is it? How much is it gonna cost to clean it up? So you want to figure out what the three-dimensional volume of it. So we go and do a phase 3, do additional soil sampling to understand the full volume of this. So the next steps, soil boring program, groundwater monitoring program, and concrete and subslab soil program. That's all going to feed into a conceptual remedial action plan. So that once we get that data back, we'll evaluate different remedial strategies to basically address the soil and the impacted zones of soil and groundwater. We're going to look at like excavation, capping, environmental use restrictions. And then from all that, we're going to look at different remedial strategies that'll feed into the planning, ultimately develop a cost for those cleanup strategies. And part of our scope of work is also to look at the floodplain survey impacts. And here's just a schedule of work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ron.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for coming out. We know we're competing with other things on your schedule today, so we're glad you're here. And I'm going to try to run through the slides that deal with airport issues. By the way, I may have spoken to some of you here, so if I had it, I'll be very related. So let's talk a little bit about the airport. We had the COVID situation a few years back, and traffic was down everywhere. We're back to pre-COVID levels at the airport, just about where we were in 2019. Just a good sign of recovery. When you take a look at what's going to happen, you think down the road in terms of activity at the airport. You take a look at things like how is the population growing? What's the disposable income levels? Do you need support aviation? First feed your families and produce over we find and also employment. And when you look at all those factors, they suggest that the airport is going to experience moderate growth. It's going to be on par with what the national forecast levels, as well as what the state is forecasting as well. And my forecasts were done before looking at theirs, so it just kind of happens, which makes me feel comfortable with my numbers. The numbers say we have 138 base aircraft at the airport today. They're going to grow over time. About use of 20 years, to 115. Most of these airplanes are going to be like we have today, single engine, aircraft. That's the common aircraft flown in the United States today, which you have the airports. Their share of the total activity is going to decline slightly as somewhat larger aircraft in place. It's also a trend that you'll see in national and state forecasts. As far as looking at how we plan for this, aircraft that use the airport frequently, we need to know something about the characteristics of flight characteristics. And runway 220, which is the main one, right, is designated to serve what we call airport reference code B2. But it's light general aviation aircraft, including some light jets. 1129 is the shorter of the three runways, and just given by its length, it's only been made and then we have a turf runway again, which handles the same kind of planning system. A little bit more about these runways. Runway 220 is 4,417 feet. What does that mean? Well, first of all, one of the things that's important about the runway is how often is it aligned with the bed winds. The winds here allow runway 220 to pick up 95% of the wind at the 10 crosswind is 90 degrees to the runway. So
And with a 95% wind coverage, it's handling most of their business jets, however, a little more sophisticated, they need more runway length. Mostly, and that's, we only have 4,417 feet, so you can't expect very heavy jets to come in and operate very heavy as well. So we do get light jets here, they may be operating at less than desired. Maybe taking times as come here because they think it's safer. We can extend this runway on the two lane that's to the south. We have two lagoons over there that may be able to be taken. Some of that I think is in the process of being discussed right now. And that'll lengthen that runway to about 5,000 feet, which is a great number for business jets. Because a lot of their insurance carriers want their policyholders to operate jets with that runways with these 5,000. It's a rule of thumb, and sometimes I wonder where they get them from, but that's the rule of thumb, and it's implements. 1129 is shorter, 2,314 feet. It's really good. We have some dusty winds here at the airport. I was like to always land into the wind. Oops. And it's good for training pilots for crosswind conditions as well. So there's some value in that runway. Extending it is just about impossible. We just have too many runways, and don't expect to do that. And finally, we took a look at the life cycle benefit process of this runway. We got input from the control tower as well in terms of how often runways are used. And it works out to 152, which would imply that it's really not justified from a benefit cost analysis. And the benefits include safety benefits and other factors as well. It's not just something to keep in mind. You may likely not be eligible for federal funding just because, basically, because it doesn't add much to the 95% new credits. It's all of the 95%, which is the FAA criteria. Turf runway is shown there to the east of the main runway 220. It's about 2,200 feet long, and it's used, particularly when there's some peak activity. That tells me that pilots will accept it. So that's great. By the way, I should have introduced myself. I'm Ron Price, and I'm the principal of QED Airport Aviation Consultants. I'm based in Wheeling, Florida. Welcome down here. Thanks, Joe. Just come in okay, getting back to the airport. Instrument approach procedures. We have procedures to runway 2, which the instrument approach allows pilots to land in marginal weather conditions, non-zero type weather. It's not the capability anymore, is it? But it's limited to runway 2, and I think that it could be improved. Right now, you have precision instrument approach. You might be able to get an LPD. I'm using terms you don't know. I mean, most of the pilots stuff is in new term, but it's a more precise type of approach. I think it's possible, something that we explore with the FAA since they publish the procedures. They design them as well, but we won't publish more. On the land side, we have enough land on this airport to accommodate jet activity. Probably even more than that's great. So from an operations point of view, the airport is functioning pretty well, and that's the capability to do that. Take a look at our capital improvement program. This is input from this Connecticut Airport Authority, as well as my own analyses. And through the next 20 years, we're looking to spend $22 million. A lot of it is eligible for FAA grants, if you can get them. But if you use the formulas, the federal government can participate up to $19 million. The airport authority will pony up some more. And some projects are just not eligible for federal funding. So that'll come from the private sector, mostly in the big business. Take a look also at how efficient we are, especially by how well the airport is functioning on a dollar basis, right? So the airport takes in about this is a 3-year average, about $938,000 a year. Most of that comes from land use. It's into flowage fees, occasional landing fee. And, but it costs them $1.18 million. So they're operating at a loss, about $558,000. A good part of that, though, is in the state employee retirement system. So I'm used to living in that, so I don't know too much about this thing, but apparently the pension program for state employees is hurt. And so monies are being distributed back to that pension. If you take that out, the airport is still out. So we have net operating loss and a net operating loss. And most of the expenses at the airport are wages and salaries. And that's not atypical. Most general aviation airports I work at don't carry it full weight. Relying on subsidies from the governments to provide for capital improvements. The goal is to operate at least for a community. A lot of airports can do that. So this airport is not operating at break even. If it wants capital improvements, it's going to have to come from some of the source within the connector or the place. So the airport is offering a great service primarily to the small aircraft segment of the general aviation market. It has some limited ability for handling larger planes, and if you want it to be extended, the better. We have enough land to put in more hangars, tie down areas. The features of the amenities. It's going to experience a loss, net loss, net loss. Everyone look at it. That's common, so don't feel it's in the world. It's just the way the general aviation airport market is. For most general aviation, I'm not talking in miles. And one of the things I think this airport could do, this could be a base for a little bit. Some of you are familiar with this electric vertical takeoff and landing. It's a relatively new, well, it's not a new concept, but now it's coming into because of the issue, fuel and other issues and noise. I think there's a chance that you could have a little bit of this. Just think about potential people visiting Hartford, coming down to Brainard, popping in a VTOL, going to downtown Manhattan, going to Boston, locations within 200 miles, which is what these aircraft are going to serve. They got batteries way high. They don't think they're going to fall. So, but it could work. I think there's a potential. So now I took a look at, well, what happens with this airport being closed? Where are these 153 or 138 aircraft going to go? So I look around. This is a synopsis slide. My interpretation of where aircraft want to relocate. It's a big if. And it's based on where do the pilots live, and I had that data. It's based on what is available at the existing airports in terms of their available airfield, as well as terminal area capacity, or the ability to expand and accommodate. And you look at the airport layout plans, master plans, and you get a sense of what they're able to do. I also wanted to make sure they had enough adequate runway to serve these airports, and that there were services of fuel and emergency. So turns out most of the airports are very well equipped to handle the aircraft that would have to relocate, reposition from Brainard if the airport were closed. A little summary of where these planes were. When you look at distribution, we're talking about $7.3 million facilities to handle these frequencies. To also take a look at noise, because people are going to say, well, you're just taking noise from Brainard and you're going to put it in my computer. But when you distribute those aircraft out, you take a look at what is the incremental impact increase in noise using the FAA screening model, it turns out that it really isn't going to change things very much. So that's a very positive indication. And as far as water and air quality impacts, it's really de minimis in terms of emissions. So my next steps are to summarize this a little bit more detail in my report, which will be available to you down the road shortly. And also begin to prepare the document that will go to the FAA. If the state legislature decides to trust it. But I'm going to prepare the document anyway, so that's part of the issue. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Thomas, who will offer concluding comments on it. Maybe these were my comments. It didn't look familiar when I saw it.
All right, so next steps, where we are right now, this is meeting number 2 of our 5 public meetings. Our next meeting will be May 18th, and we'll be going over environmental conditions on the site. We're going to have our phase 2 done, all the 170 borings and 20 test wells that we're doing. And as Jim said, we're taking into consideration all the surrounding stuff that's coming onto the property potentially and on the property itself. Our meeting number 4 will really be highlighting all of the economic conditions, both on the current uses as well as starting to look at our highest and best uses based on market analysis and market scans, starting to develop those. Our meeting 5 will be going over highest and best uses based on all this information we've now collected over the last 5 months into determining part of what the airport is. Now you have to remember, under the legislative mandate, we have to look at both keeping the airport open and what improvements are happening to that. And then if the airport was to close, what is that procedure, as well as highest and best use redevelopment scenario on the property, and give that to the state legislature. They will then make that decision on which way they would like to go. We have, we're doing the economic engagement events. So we have continued interviews with some more developers that we are moving along here. We'll have the economic impact survey of the airport. And again, we're putting all this information up on our site, Hartford Brainard Airport Study, 23.com, both English and in Spanish. And so you'll see tonight's presentation. We'll have copies of this ready for you to download, as well as the presentation we're recording right now with interview questions. So we'll have all of that ready for you. Our April-May work plan is to finish up the phase 2 regulatory. We'll be working with Ron to start drafting up those documents, and then the economic market assessment. So again, our next public meeting will be May 18th. And so we'll have a lot to talk about just in terms of our environmental impacts and what we're finding. So again, then moving into our July meeting, is we're very close to finalizing those right now. And so again, there's our airport website. Again, we encourage you, we'll have all the stuff up. Probably if I get home tonight, I'll go throw some of the stuff up, and if not tomorrow. Again, you can submit questions on that website, so any questions that come up, as well as we put up there the SWOT analysis that we did at the last meeting. That's up on Social Pinpoint. You can still add your comments under your strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. We will be taking the work that we are doing tonight on if the airport is to remain open, comments there, adding those in, and if the airport were to close, we'd like to see there. These comments right here are going back to both Ron and to Jameson to help us out in that market scan. So it's really important. We encourage you to grab a sticky, go put something on the back there, and tell us your opinions. So what we'll do is I will turn it over to Frank here. And
I think what we're going to do is just take a 10-minute break. There's coffee. It's ready. Someone was saying one of the coffees was not working well, but they're both bright red now, and I think it's ready. But I think what we'd like to do is actually get underway, certainly by 7:30, because we've been asked to conclude at 8:30. So I'd like to leave an hour for Q&A and your discussion, any comments you'd like to make. So we'll take that short coffee break now, but we want to get back at 7:30 because we've been asked to conclude by 8:30. And I'm told, I don't know if this is, I hope this isn't the case, that they are planning to close the gates out here at 9 o'clock, so we do want to stay on schedule. So thanks a lot, grab a cup of coffee, and we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. We have an hour till 8:30, so we've got 2 microphones and we can give you a mic. So as people find seats, we'll go ahead into a discussion. Again, just to repeat what Thomas said, here is the website. So if you need to if you want to see this presentation tonight, of course, the sun has nicely cooperated, now it's set, so. But at any rate, there is the website. There's one other member of the team, I think most of you may know him, that eventually, as this project goes through, Dwight Marion, who's in the front row here, is going to be regulatory guidance for us in terms of the airport and whatever come up with at the end in terms of implementation. So Dwight is also a part of this team. So with that, could I ask for, yes, sir. Oh, you gotta, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I have a question for Ron, I'm sure where he went. So Ron, I want to make sure I understood what you said before. I thought I heard you say that as part of your tasks, you were going to prepare a closure report in the event that the decision was made to close the airport. Did I hear you right?
That's right.
I don't see anything in the public act that would authorize that work done now.
That's part of my scope.
I guess I would like to know where in the public act that would be defined.
It's part of the regulatory process associated with either keeping the airport open or keeping it closed.
But the report would be used after a decision. is
It's
made to
after.
close.
The report will be there. They can unfold it when they want. If they make a decision to close the airport, the report will be there and meets FAA's, will meet FAA's guidance on how to prepare these reports. There are very specific things you can and can't say.
I understand it, but why wouldn't that report be prepared after a decision?
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. Let me assure you something. We have, this is not indicative. Anything on our team that would indicate or advocate closing the airport. We haven't reached any decision on whether the airport should remain open or the airport, there's alternative uses that can be. Ron was simply responding to FAA requirements in this. So that's not a particularly, most of Ron's contract is on the airport operations that we just saw. So this is not indicative of any decision.
Well, it seems not only not indicative, it seems like it's a step too far.
No.
Based on the
If the state,
public act.
if the state legislature needs to make a decision, go, no, go, they need to make it know what's in that. Closure. They need it for both. That's the whole point. They need to see the pros and cons of both options, and that report will do that for them. This report here is strictly how well can this airport function down the road? And if it were to close, where might the aircraft?
So
And as far as we can,
as part of that analysis, has there been any assessment of the net benefit to general aviation that would be required to be analyzed under this process?
yes, definitely, that's part of the next report. That's, the FAA is looking for what is the net benefit to civil aviation. Closing the airport. That's my challenge, to try to define, it. And I may not be able to come up with it. But I know it.
Yes, from one perspective, I think that process seems like it's within the scope of the public act. Preparing a closure report is not within.
No, it's not a closing. There needs to be.
I think that's why I asked you, but that's what you recommended. So that's
As Thomas has pointed out to me, now, it's just, we haven't quite gotten to item 4 yet, but it is, it's just the identification of federal, state, local government obstacles, including contractual obligations, so this runs trying to cover those FAA requirements, but we heard what you said, and I want to assure you, though, doing that type of work is not predictable. We haven't gotten there yet. And I just repeat where we are tonight. We're into government, we're into the airport operations tonight. That was the focus of this. We wanted to first also identify. There were certain things said in the first workshop too. I think were confusing a little bit on the pilot, how much money in the airport, what the benefits of the airport are. We tried to summarize that. And then Ron's part tonight is try to get into the airport operations, which will continue. His first report, as soon as we have that and review it, that will also be on the website. So I hope you'll see all of that and what's in his charge before the third workshop. And then we'll have Jim's information up online before the third workshop also, because the third workshop is upcoming one today. May 13th, May 18th, will be focused on the environment. And then the final one, we focused on the market with James, and the reason for that is that you can't determine as the best use of which you need to play with this. So that's the overall. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for putting this together. Really appreciate it. There's one premise that is completely missing from your models, and that's the use, the corporate, the business use of this airport. And it is, I mean, the 2016 report, 3 major insurance companies explicitly stated that these are 3 companies that hold 15,000 jobs in the region. Explicitly stated that closing the airport will adversely affect their business. They do not like it. One of them has already left out. The other one's in 2025. The third one I do not know. But my question really simply is, this is not just a commercial, a general aviation, it's also a corporate thing. You cannot move their aircraft or whatever's left of their aircraft around here to Meriden or Wyndham or whatever. A CEO or any business executive would love to be in downtown Hartford in 5 minutes from his or her private jet or helicopter or whatever. 15,000 jobs has a serious economic impact for a city that is literally still teetering on the bank, on the brink of bankruptcy. And what I have dug up, did research in terms of the marketing, the promotion from the business aviation side. I have a background in business aviation and an office down in the airport itself for several years. They have been literally starving business aviation out of Brainard Airport, never ever thinking that the secondary effects is they will leave town and along with it thousands of jobs. And that is precisely what is happening now. How can you, if you want to know a symptom, they are downtown Hartford right now, I guess the town hall is now converting commercial, Class A commercial real estate into rental apartments. I mean, to me, that's a travesty in terms of economic development or anything like that. But we need to factor it very explicitly, the impact on our business, and this is a regional economy. We need to, I've written a 7-page public comment to the Capital Regional Government, Council of Regional Government. They have received federal funding. So technically, there are 2 studies going on regarding Brainard Airport. One is yours. The other is they're doing a study on the metropolitan transportation needs going to 2050. So 2050 means eVTOLs and AAM and UAM, which the federal government and even the US Congress is passing legislation right now about it. So all that must be factored in. This corporate aviation, the business impact, everybody's been looking the other way. It's more than an 800-pound gorilla in the room because there are tens of thousands of jobs. It has to be factored in. Okay, thank you.
Basically, we agree. And I think that Ron will be looking at that. And also, quite frankly, James, because the impacts economically on businesses in the region are significant. Your 7-page, your document.
Yeah.
Could you email it to us?
It's a public comment. I'll publish it whenever they want.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to introduce myself, Marilyn Pearson. I've been at Brainard Airport over 40 years. I learned to fly there. I taught there for 20, well, forever, I still do. 2,000 hours of instruction. I flew cargo and 135 charter. So it's my home airport and I'm pretty concerned. Over my course of, corporate aviation, I then went to 24 years at the FAA and retired. Was at headquarters. Most recently with Advanced Air Mobility and worked for CAE as the AAM lead and in a global market. So I'm concerned with Brainard for several reasons. I went back to my logbook. I have over 30 airline pilots I've taught and over 100 commercial pilots other than airline. So this is quite some time ago. There are also maintenance facilities and a maintenance training facility at Brainard. So I'm wondering how you calculate that into your impact study. Where are the pilots in the future coming from if the pilot schools are not training? If I could do that many singly that long ago, where are they coming from? Where are the flight schools gonna go where they can train with ILS approaches, precision, non-precision, day, night, VFR, IFR? If you send all of these airplanes somewhere else, where are the flight schools going, where they can accommodate? There's a high school in Hartford dedicated to aviation. We can draw from the underserved community, Capital Community College, from the high schools. The new pilots of these advanced air mobility or eVTOL aircraft don't need the college degrees. We need pilots. We can draw from Hartford. I had plenty of students from the city of Hartford. They got grants through AOPA and other organizations to fly. Some of them are airline pilots. If we stop that, if we take that away and we tell people, oh, just go somewhere else. Barbara's run a maintenance facility with her husband forever. If you send all these aircraft to other little airports that don't have maintenance or fuel, all those people come to Brainard maintenance. Where are they going? And are all these pilots who are here gonna drive 20, 30 miles to go to your airplane? They're doing like this. You know, none of us are like 20 years old anymore. We can't just jump in the car and drive 20, 30 miles and then go fly. And Brainard is not only a gem for those who own there, but it's a serious training facility. It pumps out. As far as eVTOL, if you're thinking about eVTOLs, they may not be revolutionary, but they're going to serve cargo in the first and last mile. And we have two major hospitals right in here. And we can serve the medical community far more with an eVTOL than with a helicopter at a very fraction of the cost. So you're taking that away as well. So I know you can calculate the cost of real estate, but can you calculate the cost of not having airline tickets?
Ron's hearing this. We're gonna try to, I suggest to you, by the way, we have someone taking careful notes on this. Can we make sure we get their contact information to Taylor Young right here and then Ron will be, we've got to take that into consideration. I realize that is a little different than just money, costs, eventually. We've got to take that into consideration. So we will try to do that. By the way, I don't want people to think I don't want people to think because Ron has shown where the other airports are, and if Brainard closed where we could go, we're required to do that. We're actually asked to look at both options. One, does the airport stay, and what are the benefits of that? And you both very well agree with it, and those benefits are being explored. Versus, if there are alternative uses to the airport, there will probably be some economic analysis on, by the way, those alternative uses. You'll hear more about from Jameson, but we talked about it with the first workshop. And that being Hartford, written their article on the vacancy of office, Hartford. And so there, those alternative use analysis or lack of alternative uses will also play into the end of this. So we have not gotten to a point. I want, gentlemen back here, I want you to understand, we have not made any determination of this aviation. Now, I'm not going to say to you at the end of this study, could we make that determination? And that determination would be up to the legislature. So, but we've been charged with looking at both options, so we do our best to look at the pros and cons, and we just, as you just highlighted, pros, I think very well. This,
Thank you for an interesting presentation. I don't believe that point one up there is capturing the full impact, economic impact of the use of the property. If we applied that kind of analysis to, let's say, schools or parks and everything, we probably shut them all down, because the value of schools and parks is not just their payroll and whatever they get to taxes, it's they have a very high degree of value. And similarly, the real value of this airport is not its immediate payroll, not tax trivia or whatever it's for taxes. There's a lot of values, and I think that needs to be, it's difficult to quantify in some ways, but I think we have to take a shot at it. And I think there are three things in particular, and some of the other attendees here have touched on this. I think the first is the value of business aviation in the state capital and in the capital of commerce. I think the second economic impact that needs to, at least we take a shot at quantifying, is the attractiveness of this region to the kinds of people who fly airplanes, which is to say the kinds of people, the skilled people who make up our aerospace industry. Without the aerospace industry, Connecticut would basically shut down and go away. I mean, that's big. And that's a lot of money. I could live and work in other places. The fact that there's an airport here gives us an attractive place for people to work, and certainly a lot of my other pilot friends, that's the case. And the third thing, and this was also touched on, is the immense value of the students' involvement. Yesterday, I was building an airplane with some students, and workforce development, pilot training, mechanic training. Those are really, we have airports not because we want to generate payroll, not that that's a bad thing. It's significant. We have airports because they offer great value in various ways. And I think to adequately satisfy point one of your mandate, you need to incorporate them in none of those today. So what I would like to see is a elaboration of point one of the study that looks at an attempt to not only just list all the value that it has, but also some attempt to quantify.
thank you. Very well put, and I think you've said some things that were also, we heard at our first workshop, that there are certain things we can quantify, but there are certain things we cannot quantify, and I agree with you on trying to quantify the benefit of Goodwin Park here in the South End. Can't do that. It's just we have to do that. Yes, sir.
I have two questions. I'm David Evans. First, to the first gentleman that's doing the economic impact. Are you, and we all know that the airport can be substantially improved. As part of your evaluation of the airport and its potential, but not just what it is at the moment, but what it is, if all the potential is there, is improved, will that be part of your evaluation? In other words, they're going to put a restaurant in there. They're going to do the potential for other activities there for improvements. So if you as part of your report, you assess what the economic impact would be of an improved airport. One that certainly we all recognize that there could be. That's the first my question. The second one has to do with the environmental thing, so I'll let him go ahead on the first.
Great. On the first one, I just wanted to say that one of the things that Ron is doing is what are the improvements needed or desirable to improve the airport. And once he does that, then what that figure out is.
Yeah, and I would say to your example of the restaurant, I think that there is the way the legislation is written, it is designed to look at the operations as they are. But I think that, as you noted, there is both recent history that suggests operations could be a little bit different, such as they were pre-COVID and what plans are for the future. So we'll be looking at what are some of those improvements capital-wise, but also plans in terms of tenanting the airport to understand what might that incremental benefit be if, you know, there is a certain type of tenant that comes in, such as a restaurant or something.
Well, if it's made into a truly executive level airport, what would the value of that be? I think that would be part of the airport. And not just a suggestion. Now, on the environmental issue, I have like a couple of questions. We've got a limited amount of dollars here, $1.5 million. Who's making the determination on the level of the environmental inquiry? We know, and there was testimony at the Capitol when this original bill was passed, how expensive that is. You could take $1 million and according to in some people's opinion, you could take the whole $1.5 million and still not be sufficient for purpose of investigating the environmental situation. So who's making that determination as to the level? Are we getting a Volkswagen inquiry, or are we getting a cabinet inquiry? And how much of your budget is allocated to that? As a subset of that are the dikes being investigated as to the status of
Answer to the first part is we're going to do that jointly with Ty and Bond, who's our environmental consultant, so BFG and Ty and Bond. We'll be working together on that, but let me just let Jim, who is leading the Ty and Bond effort on the environment, just add it.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I know environmental investigations are expensive. You know, I've been doing these for over 30 years, and there's different levels of environmental assessment. So we were bidding on this project. We looked at what the objectives were, and we put together a work plan and cost for that, which we think is sufficient to inform the planning study to give them the data they need. You know, we are putting in quite a few borings and soil samples. Our overall budget's around 250,000, I think, in that range, which is, you know, it's not chump change. It's, you know, we think it's going to bring us enough where we're going to have enough data to form the planning study, and we can look at remedial alternatives and costs. You know, if you were to close the site out and get an LEP sign off by me, you probably would need more. But there's different levels of study you need for different projects, different data objectives. So I think what we propose is sufficient to, like I said, inform the planning study.
How about the dikes?
The dikes are actually off-site, so we can't punch holes into those things. They're not on the property. But we are looking at the dikes as part of Ty and Bond's task regarding the flood analysis.
The current environment, what about the interplay? Sorry.
Yeah, let's go through, let's let everyone speak first and then we'll come back. So, yeah, great.
So, Mr. Fish and Mr. Madden, thank you so much. I've already emailed you several times and sent you documents, etc. But I'm heartened because most of the people in the room have concerns similar to mine as far as process. And I know your mandate. I acknowledge the mandate that the legislature gave you, but I would like to ask sincerely, have you ever had a project scope change halfway through? Because, for example, let's say to Craig's point, the FAA stepped in and says, you know what, we're not going to get rid of Brainard no matter what. Okay, possibility A. The example I've given you a couple times is Hartford. As a Hartford resident, I apologize to everyone in this room for our politicians and their ridiculous opinions. And I keep waving around the deed, but the deed says if Hartford wants to do something with it, it has 1 year to come up with fair market value, 1 year. And then it would have to pay for remediation, and it would also have to pay to buy out all the contracts. The total estimate of that is 90 million, 80 to 90 million. Hartford doesn't have that. As a matter of fact, thank you taxpayers, state taxpayers, you're paying our bonds off. So thank you, for 18 more years. Again, my question is, I like to approach things linearly. That item on your, I think it was identify obstacles. I really truly believe that although Hartford was the reason, or they're at fault for creating the 1.5 million study, it really didn't need to be done, honestly. But if the FAA were to determine before anything else happened, and if we were to get some kind of ruling saying, because the word shall in Connecticut is mandatory, per this deed, if the state decides to discontinue it, and it's the state's decision, Hartford has 1 year. And I just think that there really are physical obstacles, including the dikes, building near them or whatever, the contamination. But if the legal obstacles are really just so insurmountable, again, my question is, have you ever changed a study halfway through if you learned otherwise? Thank you.
The simplest answer I can give to that question is yes. Yes, we have. But I'll give a secondary answer, and then someone that will be looking at legal things on regulatory things. That's why I wanted to make sure that I introduced that they know to it. So we do have someone on this that is going to be capable of looking at that question. But the answer to your question is yes. Although at the rate this study is going, we have mandated. We have. We're in mid-April. We're supposed to be finished with this in mid-September so that we can report back.
But if you ask the FAA now, they might tell you, come hell or high water, you're not closing it because it's a reliever airport. And if you got a legal opinion saying that the city of Hartford can't possibly buy it, doesn't have the money, then why are we doing this? So again, I appreciate it. I'll get that person's name, but I do want you to consider the possibility of this is all for naught. What we could learn is the environmental, which I'm excited for. Thank you.
I would just like to add something to Frank's comments. You may think that the FAA is the final word on this, but they are not. In the past several years, maybe 20, 30 years, 2 airports have closed through act of Congress. Congress can direct the FAA to close the airport, in which case they will. So that is really where the final decision will be made. Because the FAA will not answer this question. I've been through this before.
Okay.
They will say, not paper. They'll just, they'll say no, but they won't put it. They'll come from the Congress, and this is all. It's a political thing.
Hi, my name is Ravi Rajagiri. I'm not a pilot. However, I've been designing propulsion systems for the last 20 years almost. So you gotta depend on me. So, and I've also in the last 5 years written a couple of books on electric aircraft and the future of advanced air mobility, what you talked about there about which is, and I think we talked a little about, it's very difficult to assess what's going to happen with that, because a lot of it is kind of, I hate to say it, but paperwork, because people are, they're bootstrapping themselves into this new way of flight, electric VTOL flight, or even electric aircraft. Now, one thing I heard somewhere was that you could just do a heliport and get away with VTOL, and so change and take away the runway. One of the things I would say is some of the leading players in this field are not developing eVTOL. They're actually just converting Cessna Sky Skybit a month, what's it? Yeah, 3,000, thank you, or the caravan, they're taking the piston engines and converting them to airborne. Those are the ones that might be certified before some of these transitional flight aircraft. So for which you need long runways. It's not going to, you can't just have a heliport and get away with it. So don't jump to that. The other thing I wanted to ask was, we are doing a study saying that we're going to close this and move these to other airports. That's what Ron, you had said. Are there other studies that say that they're going to close those airports and move them here? And you're double counting these gains? I don't know the
I
answer.
don't think we're double counting, although we're very, where I live, I'm very well aware that there's some opposition to expanding Tweed. But I think on some of the other airports that Ron mentioned, they've got the room to.
Okay, and one other thing was, the final point is hydrogen economy, which is coming to us, the NYSERDA, the Connecticut is getting into this, they're huge. They've applied to the Department of Energy. I'm now working partly at the University of Connecticut. We are doing a lot of studies, developing a lot of hydrogen-based mobility systems. And aircraft is one of the big things. So, and I know last time you guys were here, there was a person here from Bridgeport who's trying to develop a hydrogen-based aircraft system here. So you have to consider all these things. I know it's very difficult to put dollars to it, but you have to make some consideration of what's coming in the future.
Hi, Leslie Hammond, Hartford resident. Thank you so much for your presentation. I, like the other speakers, was disappointed in the economic development, especially with the college schools and things like that. And I just, for those of you that do not live in Hartford, I want you to make sure that you know that starting about 7 years ago, when our current mayor ran for mayor, he was right on closing the airport. So that had to impact things. Where who wants to sign up for an airport in the near the city, all we did was talk about closing them, which hurt having restaurants, hurt having, more people, probably businesses or whoever, making a commitment to the airport. And he really has picked it up in the last couple of years. So I don't know how you, estimate how that has impacted us, but it's a huge impact. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question that will be sandwiched between two comments. Senator Fonfara said at a recent Blue Hills NRZ that he was sure that this study would result and justify his position that the airport will close. Fonfara thinks that this is preordained. You say it isn't. So you are either a very naive person or you're complicit in this. You can't have it both ways. Any study can manipulate data to change the results, and that's not an unknown fact. These land studies have already been conducted. It's not viable to develop. This is nothing more than a land grab by corrupt politicians. You claim that you're using objective analysis. Are you using the same criteria as was used in previous studies? Or are you using a different set of data that will sustain Fonfara's comments? And before you answer, I just want to mention that Pedro Segarra forced Hartford into a $90 million debt that we drove him and council out of office. Hartford needs to service this debt annually, which has grown to over $5 billion. It's probably over $8 million now a year with a higher interest. Now, do we want to close a 100-year-old airport that has greater marketing potential for Hartford? And they want to turn this into a land grab closure and impact millions of more dollars in debt. We said $90 million. We're already servicing a $90 million debt. By the way, I don't know if you realize that somebody told me that President Biden recently helicoptered out of this airport. This airport has a lot to offer Hartford and the region. Okay, so back to my question. Are you using the same criteria that was used in the previous study, or are you using a different set of data? Because if you are, then it's obvious where you're going to wind up. Thank you. Please answer that question.
Well, I can guarantee one thing. This is not preordained. We have no preordained idea.
But are you using the same criteria?
Now, which previous study? There's a couple of previous studies.
There's
Well,
three.
let me give you an example. There's several of them.
Yeah.
But the most recent one was done by the city of Hartford, by two firms out of New York City, was done as they told. We talked to them in about 8 weeks. So what it was a survey, sort of a market survey of options for Brainard Field. And the answer to that is no, we're not doing that type of study. We're doing an in-depth study of the environment, economic, marketability of any alternative uses on this airport. And we're going to try to understand those operations and benefits that you've been mentioning as much as possible. And that's how this team is ordered. So I can't tell you I'm not naive. You be the judge of that at the end of this study, but I can tell you that there's been no preordained view of this team that we're going to try to argue that this airport should be closed. We're trying to develop facts. What are the facts? Let me give you an example from that last study. And these are firms I know, people that are good people. And a small budget, they couldn't do what we're doing. They didn't understand all of the environmental impacts. For instance, they made a recommendation for residential on the main runway.
Yeah.
And they said, well, of course, we can't do market rate residential because the dike is 32 feet high. We'd have to raise the residential. Raise it on what? You'd have to raise on a very expensive structure. You'd have to go into soil that we want to know a bit more about than they did. They didn't know anything about it. I don't want to say anything. They knew very little about it. That's very costly. And they like to put parking underneath it. Can you imagine how expensive that would be? That's not feasible to do. So we are not going to do that type of study. We're going to look at the alternatives, whether they're marketable first. And by the way, I can go on from residential then to office, which I did let the first session do. All you have to do is look at the Hartford current photographs of the vacant office buildings in downtown Hartford. Do you think we're gonna come up with office as a real concern here or a real alternative use? Probably not. But I don't want to I don't want to, I want to let I want to let the economists do the study, but I want to give you an indication. We're going to look at real development options, what they cost, and that is not going to be the same as an 8-week study. And I'm not blaming these consultants, okay? They had very little money, very little time. We have the resources, and I believe enough time to come up with real options for this airport, or the finding that these aren't real options, as I just indicated to you. And I can indicate a third to you. There is no retail market in the greater Hartford area. That's substantial. So you can look at, I'm giving you a sort of, we're going to run through those alternatives. Residential, extremely expensive here. Office, 25 or 30% vacancy rate. 45. And then there's retail. You find me a developer that wants to do a lot of it. So I would say to you, we're going to do our study in greater depth, and it will not be similar to at least the last study. I want to remind you, our client is not the city of Hartford. Our client is the state legislature. And I believe the reason they've hired us is to give them back an honest answer. Maybe I'm naive in that, but we intend to give them back honest answer to this question. So that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, forgive me for not understanding the difficulty. I was listening airport operations. I was listening to the list of airports that you mentioned, and then I kind of graphed them out. I realized that taking Brainard, put a large black hole
right in the middle, right in the center of Connecticut. And force would-be executives to drive at least an hour, probably an hour and a half. So, you know, driving their executive jets and that sort of stuff. Because the only thing that can handle jets around here is Bradley, Waterbury, Hartford, Wyndham, New Haven. Yeah, and Wyndham's questionable, New Haven or Bridgeport. Now, some guy who flies his executive jet in, he's not gonna land in New Haven and then spend an hour and a half on the clogged highways trying to get to, and so he's gonna think about that real close before he thinks about relocating some sort of business to this place, because he wants to be able to get in. The smaller airports, they don't have towers for the most part. So the student pilots that are being trained, and most of them don't have approaches. You know, so the pilots that are being trained are gonna be shorted and they're not gonna be an advantage. So, you know, between the executives and the pilots, everybody's getting shorted because this black hole that somebody wants to close the airport, and that's not right.
Hi. First thing I'd like to note is that none of the political figures who are interested in closing and want the airport closed come here. They don't come to these. They apparently don't want to know what the people are saying, which is not unusual in Hartford.
I don't mean to interrupt, but the mayor did come first. The mayor of Hartford.
Oh, I didn't see him. No, he wasn't here. No, that was Jimmy Sanchez, the councilman, who's now in the legislature. So let me say one thing. I have a few things to say. I'm Ann. I've lived in this city most of my life, born here, educated here. I've been a journalist for about 47 years, which tells you I'm pretty damn old. But the thing is, never believe that this whole initiative by the state is not political. I can tell you, and I think most of the people in here know this, it is definitely politically motivated. And that political motivation comes from one person, but it has, well, we're not gonna name names, okay? I'm not naming names. I'm not naming names. There is one person behind this who has made these attempts to get that land for close to 30 years now, and they have failed previously. The people in Hartford have made it very clear on the city council, the mayor, is that what they want is to have what is known as the South Meadows, which it can't be called a neighborhood. It has been nothing but an industrial area for as long as I can remember. People do not live down there. They've had some cool strip clubs down there, a couple of movie theaters, but basically it's just industrial. They owe their political positions to that one person who has been trying to do this for 30 years. Am I right?
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, the point is, it's not a neighborhood. The city council has been very clear, including the ones who are for this, which is basically the majority of the council who owe their jobs to the person who wants that land. The fact is, they say they want more high-end housing. We have so much unaffordable housing, rental housing on the market in Hartford right now. That is the last thing we need, is more of that. The other thing is, one of the city councilors thinks it would be a great idea to have a nice big Amazon warehouse there. You talk about a dead-end job, that's an Amazon warehouse, okay? We don't want that for our youth. Flight training schools, flight mechanic schools are obviously career options. Amazon, burn them out, throw them out, bring some more in. You all know that. Now we have something called the North Meadows. We have the North Meadows, Brainard is in the South Meadows. The North Meadows used to have about 4 things in it. It had a Howard Johnson's, it had the city jail, It had the US Post Office, which is still there. And it had Hartford High Lie, a gambling venue that was very popular. You know what's down there now? About 15 car dealers. That's their economic development. It's really not doing anything for the people of Hartford. It's selling cars. There's another city councilor whose idea is that we should have a marina down where Brainard is. Why? Because he's a boat owner. He would love to have a marina down there. He's tired of docking down in Essex. He wants it right here in town, where it's easier for him to get there. And I understand that the Army Corps of Engineers has oversight over the dikes. And I think you would have to have their permission before any idea of a marina could even happen. Brainard Airport is a gem. A lot goes on there. Yet you have these people who are demanding its closure, saying, oh, it's nothing but a playground for wealthy people who own private planes. There's a hell of a lot more going on at Brainard than that.
We're getting the signal, we've got to
Right.
wrap this up, so if you have a question,
My
happy to answer that
question is, I want you to, you're being paid, very well. We have this baseball stadium, this minor league stadium, and back when they were deciding whether they were gonna build it here, which has brought absolutely no profit to the city, it operates the city at a loss of 4 to 5 million every year.
all right, so.
They had a study done, quickly, they had a study done by an economics professor at UConn. And he and his grad students do it, and he came back to present it to the council and the public and told them how, yes, he was gonna bring really great jobs to the city, and it was gonna fill up the hotels and fill up the restaurants and all that stuff. When he walked out in the hall, I walked out to talk to him, and I asked him if he really believed what he had told us, and he said, oh, no, he said, that would be the best case scenario if that happened. I'm trusting that you gentlemen and the one lady who I didn't see here are going to do what you know is right, with integrity, with intelligence, with honesty, and that's what I hope now. Thank you.
Question.
Greetings, gentlemen. I'm going to be very brief. Thank you, Ann, for that
Peter,
exposition.
go right ahead.
Appreciate everything you said.
I don't mind exposing.
On many fronts.
Thank you.
My name's Peter Little, relatively new resident of Greater Hartford, familiarizing myself with the issue. I wanted to go back to the visioning study, the so-called visioning study, the City Commission that was released quite suddenly to many of us, surprisingly to many of us. What can you tell us? What's the backstory to how that study was ginned up? Came out of the city's Department of Development Services. And do you know anything about that you could share? Number one. And number two, quick question on that is, oh, sorry, are you cutting me off?
No.
The other quick question is, as was referenced here by several members of the public, this is of course an electoral year, and there are, is it 8 or 9 mayoral candidates, some of whom are extraordinarily knowledgeable about Brainard Airport. One in the room, the only candidate for mayor who is here tonight is extraordinarily knowledgeable about the airport. You probably know. Yeah. Some of the others are extraordinarily ignorant about it. One, notably, at a recent mayoral forum, claimed there were 35 airplanes, and that everything he learned from everything he needed to know about Brainard, he learned from Jimmy Sanchez, now a former councilman who worked until recently, who still works, right, at the NBC.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
So is that?
So the question is, what role, even though this is not a city of Hartford decision, what role, there is still a kind of an element of the bully pulpit and public opinion, swaying public. What role will the new mayor, will the mayor have, not the current mayor, because he's on the way out, but will the candidates for mayor play? What role can they play, you think, in influencing and impacting this decision? Not necessarily your study, because you are scientists.
So let's go back here to
I remember now after I'm done with the first one. Okay, in terms of the elected officials, it is coming from the state legislature. It is the legislation that was passed. That is what we're following, We do not talk to the politicians. The only politicians I have seen so far and said, talk to, the ones that have come here to this meeting, I've said hi to. Don't call us up, then send us emails. We have full records of everybody who's contacted. Okay. In terms of the city of Hartford's WXY study, we were surprised that came out, but that was something that was done by the city. We have no knowledge of it. We don't know why they did it. It's
What's
just
it
one of
cost, you know?
no idea. You'd have to ask the city of Hartford. We are working for the state of Connecticut. So anything with the state of Hartford and what, or the city of Hartford and what they have done, as well as the people who are running for mayor and council members, unless they are members of the legislature and they are part of that finance and bonding committee who will make that final decision, there is nothing. And all we do is we're reporting back to DECD. We do not report back to anybody else. It is all going to the Commissioner Long of DECD. That's who we're and that's it.
Thank you. Our study also will be done before the election results are out.
Yes.
I don't know who the mayor will be, but our study will be submitted to the general assembly. Unless something extra happens, we'll have it to them.
We have time for one more question. I will be quick. 2 points that I didn't see raised, or 2 pieces of information that I didn't see is one, a safety issue, and by that I mean the use of the airport by Lifestar helicopters, civil air patrol, the state police, and the FBI. And the fact that they are close to the capital city. And, again, the capital area, that's number one, and I'd like to know if that's going to be included. And number 2, being an owner of a business at the airport. The other thing is, again, I don't see counted the number of aircraft that come in from out of state, out of the region, and I mean from New Jersey up through Vermont and Canada that come in for services at Brainard Airport. And again, it's got a control tower and a runway.
By the way, the agencies you just mentioned, we were talking about dinner. State police, FBI, and so on. You're like, you're aware that that type of issue will be part of the study.
I was gonna say, some of those federal agencies will not give us that information. Okay, plain and simple. It is basically part of their own security, homeland security. They will not give it, so we have to estimate on some of that stuff, just to be honest with you. Okay, but we are taking into account a lot of the stuff. The other thing is, we're having problems with our business owners responding back to our survey.
They've done this 4 times.
I know, we keep reaching out to them, but we're asking any business owners, if you have business owners who have not asked them on site, because I know we've been reaching out to them, I was talking to Jameson about this.
Business owners on site or business owners in Hartford?
Yeah.
Great.
I have given this phone call for admission related to that.
Okay.
Nobody's come to visit our businesses.
Well, we're doing this, we have to do a survey first. The survey is first, so.
Make sure you have.
Yeah.
You connect. Okay. you connect.
I'm happy to chat.
We have one more question.
On the environmental, is that also the geological vertical development? And also is part of your research, what the additional cost of insurance is going to be to the anybody who would build there, the floodplain and the viability of getting business that there is a problem.
I can answer your first question. I'm a geologist as an engineer. Yeah, we do look at the geology on phase 1 environmental site assessment. I'm pretty familiar with the area. For the relation deposit. So
It's all silt.
yeah, it's all silt, and there's probably some fill there as well. We built the runways. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say I'm a geologist as well as an engineer, so I'm pretty familiar with geology. We did look at the geology. It's in our phase 1 environmental site assessment. And then when we go through do our soil borings as part of the phase 2 environmental site assessment, we'll do borings in the ground. We'll actually look at the geology, not like what kind of fill might be there, and then what's underneath that. So yeah, there'll definitely be, geology, hydrogeology valuations of the site. Regarding the insurance, that's not my area.
Yeah, but in terms of insurance and thinking about like the added costs, both to sort of market the site, but also to build on the site. In terms of understanding what's coming out of the environmental, I think any sort of assessment of any relevant real estate uses and any potential would have to factor in a premium for developing given those concerns. You know, it's both sort of on a capital side in terms of what you have to do to make it stand up, right? Stay there for however many years. But also when thinking about the pro forma for how any use might perform, I think that you know, we have the data in terms of the floodplain there, and that's something that we would add into that in terms of an added carrying expense for whatever the use is.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We promised to be finished at 8:30, but I did want to add, just mention to you on your way out, turn to the list of the next meetings. You're gonna see one on much more environmental development on the May 18th meeting, and then the economic conditions are sort of the ones I went over. What are the alternatives to the airport, and what is their feasibility on that July meeting? So that, stay tuned for these meetings. Thank you all.
Thank you. I think.
I know we didn't cover. Cross country.